The moving truck stood half-loaded when my phone rang. My neighbor Ed, 71, voice rough as gravel scraped across broken glass, spoke 6 words that froze my blood. "Ren, they're taking everything out." I shattered at least 6 traffic laws racing home. There on the porch I had rebuilt board by board with my own hands stood my father, smiling faintly, clutching a manila folder the way someone might hold the keys to a beach house they'd just bought. "We sold it," he said. "Marcus owes $87,000. You're being selfish." He delivered it casually, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. Calm, absolute, final. But here's what you need to know about my dad. He spent 3 full weeks meticulously plotting to sell my house, 3 weeks of careful planning. Yet in all that precise scheming, he overlooked one tiny but crucial detail at the county clerk's office. That single oversight changed everything. Before I continue, if this story resonates with you, please consider liking and subscribing. Drop your city and current local time in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Ren, 34, and I make my living breathing new life into forgotten houses. Now let me take you back to that Tuesday afternoon in October, the day I nearly lost the home I had poured everything into building. 3 years earlier, I purchased the most forlorn house in Mill Haven, Virginia for $47,000 at a county auction. No one else even bid. The listing agent actually chuckled when I lifted my paddle. It had sat empty for 12 years, roof caved in on the east side, 4 layers of moldy carpet hiding original oak floors untouched since the Reagan years. Locals called it the ghost house. I saw potential. Strong bones, sturdy framing beneath the decay, heart pine joists begging for fresh air and care, a wraparound porch with hand-turned balusters smothered under ugly vinyl siding. Down in the basement, wrapped in a paint-splattered tarp, lay a shattered stained glass transom that once graced the front door, over 40 fragments of amber, cobalt, and emerald. Someone had salvaged it long ago, and then let it fade into memory. I didn't let it stay forgotten. For 6 months, I sat at my kitchen table, soldering iron in hand, jeweler's loop over one eye, wielding a patience I never knew I possessed, shard by shard, piece by piece, until the light flowed through unbroken once more. That transom became the heart of the house. I installed it above the restored front door, and every sunrise sent jeweled colors spilling across the entry floor like light inside a private chapel. 3 years, $62,000 of my own savings. Every weekend, every holiday, I ripped out walls, replaced 16 rotted studs, hand-scraped the oak floors, even earned my electrical license to rewire the kitchen myself. My hands carry the scars as proof. The Heritage Home Tour, Mill Haven's yearly celebration of the finest restorations, had chosen my house as this year's featured property. The brochure was already printed, my home gracing the cover. I had no idea that while I was nailing the final length of crown molding in the parlor, my father was quietly completing a very different kind of plan. Let me introduce the Archer family. My father, Gerald, 62, retired post office manager, a man who speaks deliberately because he believes every syllable deserves its full weight. He ran our home like a small branch office, schedules posted on the fridge, chores allocated by maximum efficiency, opinions handed down as official policy. You didn't debate Gerald Archer, you simply accepted his rulings. My mother, Diane, 59, had mastered the timing of tears, not out of calculation I once believed, but pure sensitivity. I was mistaken. Then there's Marcus, my younger brother, 28, charming in the manner of a weather vane, always swinging toward whichever way the breeze blows. Bright smile, costly tastes, zero follow-through. Gerald had bailed Marcus out repeatedly, credit cards cleared 3 times, a truck purchased, 6 months rent covered after Marcus walked away from a warehouse job because the manager disrespected him. Whenever Marcus fell, Gerald was there to lift. Whenever I rose, Gerald turned his gaze elsewhere. When I bought the ghost house, I foolishly mentioned it over Sunday dinner. My father set his fork down carefully and regarded me the way you'd watch a toddler reaching toward a flame. $47,000? He said. That could have helped your brother. It's my money, Dad. Family money is family money. I stopped arguing. You don't defeat Gerald in debate. You simply cease trying. He never once visited the house in 3 years. Not for the new roof, not for the staircase stripped of 4 layers of paint, not even when the Heritage Tour Committee arrived to photograph it. But Marcus began calling 2 weeks earlier. Casual check-ins, questions about my schedule, when I'd be home, any upcoming trips. I thought he was finally reaching out. Now I realized he was gathering intel. Tuesday, October 15th, 2:13 p.m. I was 40 minutes away in Breerfield, sanding window casings on a client's 1920s craftsman bungalow. Dust mask on, radio murmuring, phone buzzing against my hip. I nearly ignored it. Ed Mulvaney, my next-door neighbor, retired plumber who once helped me sweat copper lines that first freezing winter, wasn't one to call without reason. "Wren, I don't want to alarm you." His voice trembled. Ed Mulvaney, who crawled beneath houses with live gas leaks for 40 decades, was trembling. "There's a big moving truck at your place. 2 guys are loading your furniture." My hands froze. Sawdust floated in the sunlight. "What?" "Your dad's there, directing what goes and what stays." I don't recall what I said next. I remember ripping off the mask, firing up the engine, the county road dissolving into a watercolor blur. 40 minutes became 26. The truck was massive, plain white, no logo, just a phone number stenciled on the door. Rear gate yawning open like an open mouth. Inside, I glimpsed my dining table, my floor lamp, the barnwood bookcase I'd built myself. 2 men in work gloves carried out my rolled Turkish Kilim rug, the one I'd found at a Staunton estate sale. And there, on my porch, the porch I had reconstructed with heart pine nails and hand-forged nails, stood my father, manila folder in one hand, phone in the other, serene as if he were simply collecting the mail. Marcus hunched in Gerald's sedan at the curb, head lowered, scrolling. My father looked up, saw me, and didn't startle, didn't flee. He smiled. That was the moment I understood. This was no accident. This was the plan. I climbed those porch steps on legs that felt foreign. Gerald opened the folder, withdrew a stapled document, and extended it toward me like a teacher returning a graded paper. "Here, it's done. I sold the house. Buyer paid $195,000 cash, closing Friday." The words either didn't land or my mind refused them like poisoned blood. "You sold my house?" "I had power of attorney. It's legal." He said it without a flicker, in the same tone he once used to announce dinner at 6:30 sharp. Marcus owes $87,000, Wren, to people who don't send polite reminders. They came to our house, to my front door. The screen door groaned open. My mother stepped out. House shoes, worn heels. She'd clearly been inside for hours, supervising. "Wren, honey." The tears arrived right on cue, perfectly timed. "Marcus could have been killed. Those men came to your father's house." "They threatened him. Did anyone think to call me?" Gerald's jaw clenched. "You would have said no, so we didn't ask. I did what any father would do." I stared at the contract. His signature filled the cellar line. Above it, my name typed in crisp font, followed by Gerald Archer, attorney in fact. He had used the power of attorney I signed 2 years earlier, after a scaffolding collapse left me with a fractured collarbone and a morphine drip. He'd stood at my hospital bed, insisting it was just in case. For 2 long years, he'd kept that document in a drawer, waiting for the perfect crisis or the perfect justification. "You planned this," I said. My voice held steady. I needed it to. Gerald closed the folder with a soft snap. "I saved this family." I stepped past him into the house. The living room was stripped bare. Dust ghosts marked where furniture had stood for years, phantom rectangles of a life being erased. The kitchen stood empty. The handmade butcher block island I'd crafted from a fallen walnut tree, gone, already loaded like common cargo. I moved to the front entry and looked up. The transom was missing. Heart pounding, I hurried to the garage. There it lay, My stained glass transom, the one I'd rebuilt over 6 months from 43 shattered fragments, sprawled on a moving blanket, wrapped in newspaper like yesterday's leftovers. A strip of blue painter's tape stretched across it, fragile, included with house. I knelt, peeled back the paper. A fresh hairline crack sliced through the cobalt panel. Careless handling in a single afternoon, undoing half a year of meticulous work. My hands trembled, not from fear. I carried the piece to the porch and set it gently on the railing. Gerald watched, arms folded. "That's part of the house," he said. "The buyer gets everything." I looked at him, really looked. 62 years old, graying at the temples, posture carved from decades of unshakable certainty. And in that moment, the truth cut deeper than the fracture in the glass. He didn't see my labor. He didn't see the years. He saw only a number on a check. "You didn't sell a house, Dad." My voice stayed even. "You sold 3 years of my life, and you never even asked." He exhaled sharply through his mouth. "When you're finished being dramatic, you'll see I did you a favor." Something inside me shifted. Not fury, but a cold, crystalline clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked off the porch, climbed into my truck, and did what I always do before a major demolition. I assessed the damage. The restored house was worth $310,000. Gerald had sold it for $195,000, $115,000 below market, a fire sale price. Get it done before she gets back. Deal. My $62,000 in materials, gone. 3 years of weekends, holidays, and late nights, gone. The Heritage Home Tour slot next Sunday, gone if the sale closed. My reputation as a restoration specialist, the showcase project featured on the brochure, gone. Clients don't ask for explanations when they hear a contractor's flagship project was sold out from under them. They simply call someone else. If I stayed silent, I lost the house, the money, the credibility I'd earned over a decade of honest work, and Marcus would learn, once again, that someone else would always pay his debts. I pulled out my phone, scrolled past Dad, past Mom, past Marcus, and stopped on Janet Holloway, real estate attorney, the woman who'd prepared my deed. 2 years earlier, when I discovered Gerald had quietly withdrawn $4,000 from our joint emergency account without a word, she sat me down in her office and spoke 5 words I'd never forgotten. Revoke the power of attorney. I had done exactly that, the same week, filed the revocation with the county clerk, notarized, stamped, recorded. Gerald never knew, because he never checked, because he assumed the paper in his drawer still held power. I pressed call. Janet answered on the second ring. "Janet, my father just used the old POA to sell my house." A brief pause. "The one we revoked?" "Yes." Her tone sharpened, already moving 3 steps ahead. "Has the deed transferred yet?" "I don't think so. He said closing is Friday." "Good. That gives us 2 days." I heard her opening a file. "The revocation is on public record. Patty Voss handled it personally. Any contract signed under that expired POA is void, completely void." He showed the buyer the original document. "Yes." "The original means nothing. Revocation supersedes it the instant it's filed." He'd know that if he'd bothered to check the public record. He didn't check, did he? No, of course not. Janet exhaled. "Ren, I'll file an emergency motion first thing tomorrow to block the deed transfer. The title company can't close without clear authority. Once I flag the revocation, the sale dies." Relief washed over me, followed by something heavier. "Janet, what he did, using a revoked POA to sign a contract, that's fraud, isn't it?" "At minimum, fraud. In Virginia, felony level. Depending on the paperwork, we might even be looking at forgery." I stared at the steering wheel. A daddy longlegs traced slow circles across the windshield. "Janet," continued softer now, "I told you 2 years ago, when someone abuses a power of attorney, it almost never stops at one misuse." She was right. The $4,000 withdrawal was the rehearsal. This was the main act. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked off the porch, climbed into my truck, and did what I always do before a major demolition. I assessed the damage. The restored house was worth $310,000. Gerald had sold it for $195,000, $115,000 below market, a fire sale price. Get it done before she gets back. Deal. My $62,000 in materials, gone. 3 years of weekends, holidays, and late nights, gone. The Heritage Home Tour slot next Sunday, gone if the sale closed. My reputation as a restoration specialist, the showcase project featured on the brochure, gone. Clients don't ask for explanations when they hear a contractor's flagship project was sold out from under them. They simply call someone else. If I stayed silent, I lost the house, the money, the credibility I'd earned over a decade of honest work, and Marcus would learn, once again, that someone else would always pay his debts. I pulled out my phone, scrolled past Dad, past Mom, past Marcus, and stopped on Janet Holloway, real estate attorney, the woman who'd prepared my deed. 2 years earlier, when I discovered Gerald had quietly withdrawn $4,000 from our joint emergency account without a word, she sat me down in her office and spoke 5 words I'd never forgotten. Revoke the power of attorney. I had done exactly that, the same week, filed the revocation with the county clerk, notarized, stamped, recorded. Gerald never knew, because he never checked, because he assumed the paper in his drawer still held power. I pressed call. Janet answered on the second ring. Janet, my father just used the old POA to sell my house. A brief pause. The one we revoked? Yes. Her tone sharpened, already moving 3 steps ahead. Has the deed transferred yet? I don't think so. He said closing is Friday. Good. That gives us 2 days. I heard her opening a file. The revocation is on public record. Patty Voss handled it personally. Any contract signed under that expired POA is void, completely void. He showed the buyer the original document. Yes. The original means nothing. Revocation supersedes it the instant it's filed. He'd know that if he'd bothered to check the public record. He didn't check, did he? No, of course not. Janet exhaled. Wren, I'll file an emergency motion first thing tomorrow to block the deed transfer. The title company can't close without clear authority. Once I flag the revocation, the sale dies. Relief washed over me, followed by something heavier. Janet, what he did, using a revoked POA to sign a contract, that's fraud, isn't it? At minimum, fraud. In Virginia, felony level. Depending on the paperwork, we might even be looking at forgery. I stared at the steering wheel. A daddy longlegs traced slow circles across the windshield. Janet, continued softer now, I told you 2 years ago, when someone abuses a power of attorney, it almost never stops at one misuse. She was right. The $4,000 withdrawal was the rehearsal. This was the main act. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked off the porch, climbed into my truck, and did what I always do before a major demolition. I assessed the damage. The restored house was worth $310,000. Gerald had sold it for $195,000, $115,000 below market, a fire sale price. Get it done before she gets back. Deal. My $62,000 in materials, gone. 3 years of weekends, holidays, and late nights, gone. The Heritage Home Tour slot next Sunday, gone if the sale closed. My reputation as a restoration specialist, the showcase project featured on the brochure, gone. Clients don't ask. My father branded me selfish, yet neither he nor my mother bothered to check if I was even breathing after the shock. Marcus showed up at Ed's house at 7:15 the next morning. He looked wrecked, dark circles carved like bruises under his eyes, 3 days of stubble, a wrinkled Henley he'd clearly slept in. He stood on Ed's porch, hands jammed in his pockets, shoulders rounded, every inch the little brother who used to sob when he broke a toy and waited for Big Sister to mend it. "Ren, can we talk?" Ed lingered in the kitchen doorway. I gave him a small nod. He retreated, but kept the door ajar. Marcus dropped onto the porch swing, eyes sliding anywhere but mine. "I'm in real trouble. These guys, they said if I don't have the money by the 31st, they'll—" He swallowed, leaving the threats suspended, inviting me to imagine the ugliest ending. "I know I screwed up, I know, but Dad was just trying to help by selling your house. He didn't know what else to do." "He could have called me, Marcus." Marcus scrubbed his face with both hands. "If you block this sale, I don't know what happens to me." I studied him. The tremor in his fingers was genuine. The fear was genuine. But so was the rehearsal. I'd watched Gerald coach family members at dinner tables my entire life. "Did Gerald know Dad was planning to use my house?" His gaze darted right, then down, anywhere except my face. Silence answered for him. "You knew, and you didn't warn me." "I thought you'd understand. You always figure things out." There it was, the family creed. Ren will figure it out. Ren can handle it. Ren never needs anything because Ren always lands on her feet. So, take her foundation. "How long did Dad plan this?" Marcus hesitated. "A few weeks. He called the buyer about 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks, not 5 days. 3 full weeks of quiet plotting behind my back. "Go home, Marcus." He left without a backward glance, just like Gerald. Wednesday morning, my phone rang again. "Ren, it's Linda." Linda Fessler, chair of the Heritage Home Tour Committee, voice buzzing with espresso and clipboard urgency. "Just checking in. The brochures came back from the printer. Gorgeous. Your house looks stunning on the cover. Mayor Hadley confirmed for the ribbon cutting. We've got 42 people registered." I gripped the phone harder than necessary. "That's great, Linda. I'm stopping by Friday for a final walkthrough with the photographer. I want those morning shots of the transom, the way the sunrise pours through the glass. That's the money shot. That's what goes in the county paper." I closed my eyes. If Gerald's sale closed Friday, there'd be no walkthrough, no glowing transom photo, no ribbon cutting. The featured property would belong to someone who'd likely strip the soul out and flip it into condos. "Friday works," I said, because by Friday, one way or another, everything would be decided. After we hung up, I opened the brochure proof Linda had emailed last week. Full color, glossy stock. The house bathed in golden hour, porch columns throwing long shadows, the transom burning like jeweled fire above the door. Beneath the image in graceful serif, "From Ruin to Revival, the Archer House Restoration. Ren Archer, Restoration Specialist, Featured Property, 23rd Annual Mill Haven Heritage Home Tour." 3 years of my life reduced to a single shining page. In 6 days, 42 people would step through that front door. The only question was whose door it would be. Wednesday night, Ed and I sat on his porch. October darkness settles early in the Shenandoah Valley. By 7, the streetlights glowed and moths battered the bulbs. Ed passed me a coffee, then handed over his phone. Photos. Dozens. The moving truck's license plate sharp and clear. The 2 workers hauling my dining table. A time-stamped image of Gerald on my porch, pointing at the front door like a site foreman. "Old habit," Ed said. 40 years plumbing, you document everything. Leaks, pipe conditions before and after, so when that truck rolled up, I started shooting. I scrolled. He'd even captured the cab, no company name, just a phone number stenciled on the door. "There's more." Ed cleared his throat. "When your dad was on the porch, I heard him on the phone. He said, 'Get it done before Thursday. She's back on Friday.'" I stared at him. Marcus's calls 2 weeks earlier replayed in my head. "How's work? Any big projects? When are you heading to Briarfield?" I'd answered every question like an idiot handing over the security code. "One more thing," Ed added. "Your dad made another call. I caught part of it. Closing's Friday at the title company, same day she gets back. By then, it's done. Same day. He'd timed it to the hour. Deal closed Friday morning, deed transferred, money wired to clear Marcus's debt, my house belonging to a stranger before I even turned onto my street. I called Janet and relayed the timeline. "Good," she said. "I'll have the freeze filed before they open Friday." Ed sipped his coffee. "The buyer, Rye, I think, came by yesterday to measure rooms. Seemed like a decent guy. Doesn't know what he stepped into." I watched the moths fling themselves at Ed's porch light. Some creatures simply can't resist flying straight into the flame. Thursday morning, I checked my mailbox. Empty. Not empty like no mail today. Empty like it hadn't seen a letter in weeks. The red flag was down. Dust coated the inside. I drove to the post office. Tasha, the clerk I'd gone to high school with, looked up my mail forwarding status. She typed, frowned, typed again. "It says a forwarding request was filed 2 weeks ago. All your mail redirected to," she read the address, "Gerald's house. Authorized by you." I didn't authorize anything. Tasha turned the screen. There was my name on a USPS change of address form. The signature was close. Gerald had practiced, but the slant was wrong. I signed with a forward lean. This one stood rigid, my father's hand wearing my name. "That's not my signature, Tasha." Her eyes widened. I drove to Gerald's house. He wasn't home, but his mailbox overflowed. Return addresses I recognized, the title company, the buyer's agent, a certified letter from the county assessor's office, 2 weeks of my mail, intercepted, stashed, every notice that might have warned me, closing statements, title search results, buyer correspondence, rerouted to Gerald's kitchen table. He hadn't just sold my house, he'd first made sure I couldn't see it coming. I photographed the overflowing box without touching anything, then called Janet. "Wren?" Her voice dropped low. "Unauthorized mail forwarding with a forged signature. That's federal, U.S. Postal Inspection Service, not county court." I sat in my truck outside my father's house. The man who'd managed this same post office for 30 years had weaponized his insider knowledge to forge my redirect. He knew the system would never question a form from a retired postmaster. My father had spent 3 weeks constructing a perfect trap. What he didn't know was that the single most important piece, the power of attorney, was legally dead for 2 years, and I was about to deliver its death certificate. Okay, I need to pause the story for a moment. In my view, and from everything I've lived through, fathers don't accidentally forge their daughter's signature on a USPS form. He practiced my handwriting. 30 years running that post office gave him intimate knowledge, exactly which form to use, exactly how to submit it without triggering suspicion. And Marcus's calls 2 weeks earlier, probing my schedule, that wasn't sudden brotherly concern, that was reconnaissance. So here's the question I still carry. Why didn't my father simply ask me for help? He had 3 full weeks. What made him so certain I'd refuse? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear them. All right, now the story moves into the open. Thursday morning, I needed stain for a client job, so I stopped at Millhaven Hardware. Dennis Pewitt, the owner, a man who'd sold me enough wood screws to frame another house, stood behind the counter. He looked at me with the uneasy sympathy reserved for someone carrying terminal news. "Everything okay at home, Wren?" My stomach sank. "Why?" "Your dad came in yesterday, bought packing tape. We got to talking." Dennis shifted his weight. "Said you're having some family trouble, that Marcus is in a rough spot, and you're, not helping." "What exactly did he say?" Dennis avoided my eyes. "That you'd rather hold on to an old house than save your own brother who's in real danger." His words. I left, drove to the cafe on Main Street, ordered a coffee I had no intention of drinking. 2 women I knew from the farmer's market sat by the window. When I stepped inside, one leaned toward the other and whispered something. I didn't need to hear it to feel the shift in the air. Later that evening, back on Ed's porch, the weight of the day settled. But the real turning point came Friday morning. I arrived at the house just before the scheduled closing. Janet had filed the emergency motion at dawn. The title company was already aware. The buyer, Ray Colton, pulled up in a clean SUV. Gerald was there, manila folder in hand, posture still certain. Linda Fessler from the Heritage Tour Committee had arrived early for the walkthrough. Ed stood on his own porch next door, arms crossed, watching. I walked up the steps holding a single sheet of paper. "This is a revocation of power of attorney," I said, voice steady. "Filed with the county clerk's office 2 years ago. Recorded, stamped, notarized. The document my father used to sign that contract was dead long before he ever contacted Mr. Colton. Any agreement signed under it is legally void." The porch fell into a heavy, breathing silence. Gerald's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's not possible. I checked." "You checked the copy in your drawer, Dad. You didn't check the public record. Anyone can look it up." Color drained from his face in slow layers. First the certainty, then the composure, then something raw, the dawning realization that the foundation he trusted had never existed. Ray Colton stared at the contract in his hands, then at Gerald. His jaw tightened. "You told me this was legitimate." Linda Fessler stood 3 feet away, hand pressed to her mouth. Ed leaned against his porch railing, coffee gone cold, eyes fixed on the scene. The trap my father had built over 3 meticulous weeks had collapsed under the one detail he'd never bothered to verify. And in that moment, on the porch I'd rebuilt with my own hands, the truth finally stood exposed in the October light. Diane's tears stopped. Not because she willed them to, but because the atmosphere had shifted so utterly that even her practiced performance couldn't keep pace with the raw truth unfolding. Gerald turned to her. She offered nothing. No quick defense, no softening excuse. For the first time in my memory, my mother met my father's gaze and let it stand uncovered. I didn't need to raise my voice. The document did that for me. Ray Colton was not a patient man. He'd driven 40 minutes from the neighboring county, handed over a $20,000 deposit, scheduled the closing, already lined up contractors for renovations, and told his wife they'd scored a Victorian at a steal. Now he stared at Gerald Archer with the look of someone who'd bitten into a perfect apple, only to find rot all the way to the core. "You told me she was on board." Ray's voice stayed low, controlled, more cutting than any shout. "You told me the POA was valid. I gave you $20,000 on your word." Gerald lifted both hands, palms out. "The revocation can be contested. There are legal channels." "It can't." A new voice cut through, clear and precise. Janet Holloway strode up the driveway, navy blazer, leather portfolio in hand. I'd called her at 7:30. She'd driven straight from her office. "The revocation was filed, recorded, and is irrevocable under Virginia Code Section 64.21.12, she said. "Mr. Colton, I strongly recommend you contact your own attorney immediately to pursue recovery of your deposit from Mr. Archer." She paused, eyes locking on Gerald. Ray stared at the contract in his hands, then at my father. The look that followed wasn't anger. It was contempt, pure, quiet, and final. "You owe me $20,000. He folded the papers, slipped them into his jacket pocket, climbed into his truck, and slammed the door. Gone. Gerald remained on my porch, clutching a worthless document and a collapsed deal, watching his last ally disappear down the street. Diane reached for his arm. "Gerald, what do we do now?" He gave no answer. For the first time in 62 years, Gerald Archer had no policy to declare, no schedule to enforce, no verdict to deliver. Linda Fessler observed everything. I caught her drawing a slow, quiet breath, then looking at me, really looking. In her eyes was something absent 5 minutes earlier, understanding. Soon everyone had left except Gerald, Diane, and me. Janet waited in her car at the curb, engine idling, granting me space. Gerald turned to face me. His voice had changed. The old commanding tone was gone. In its place, something almost like pleading, but carefully constructed. Gerald Archer didn't beg, he reframed. Ren, listen to me. Those men Marcus owes, they'll come back. The money was supposed to be in their hands by the 31st. If this sale falls through, they'll hurt your brother. You understand that. He's your blood. You had 3 weeks to call me. My words came even, unhurried. 3 weeks to sit me down and say Marcus is in trouble. Instead, you stole my house. I didn't steal it. I was protecting this family. You were protecting Marcus. You were sacrificing me. There's a difference, Dad. His eyes narrowed. The old, familiar Gerald flickered back, the one who never lost arguments because he never permitted them. Fine. His voice flattened, turned cold. When something happens to your brother, that's on you. He pointed at me, right there on my porch, in full view of Ed watching from next door, Linda pulling away from the curb, Janet's rearview mirror. That blood is on your hands. I didn't flinch. No, Dad. It's on the person who gambled away $87,000, and it's on the person who committed fraud instead of picking up the phone to talk to his daughter. Gerald held my gaze. I held his. 5 seconds. 10. Then something I'd never witnessed before. My father looked away first. Diane touched his elbow. Let's go, Gerald. Quiet, defeated, no performance left for anyone. They walked to the car. His steps were slower than I remembered. Diane never glanced back. 3 weeks to sit me down and say, Marcus is in trouble. Instead, you stole my house. I didn't steal it. I was protecting this family. You were protecting Marcus. You were sacrificing me. There's a difference, Dad. His eyes narrowed. The old Gerald resurfaced, the one who never lost arguments because he never allowed them. Fine, his voice flattened, turned icy. When something happens to your brother, that's on you. He pointed directly at me, right there on my porch, in plain view of Ed watching from next door, Linda pulling away from the curb, Janet's rearview mirror reflecting the scene. That blood is on your hands. I didn't flinch. No, Dad, it's on the person who gambled away $87,000, and it's on the person who committed fraud instead of picking up the phone to talk to his daughter. Gerald held my stare. I held his. 5 seconds. 10. Then, something I'd never seen. My father looked away first. Diane touched his elbow. Let's go, Gerald. Quiet, defeated, no audience left to perform for. They walked to the car. His steps were slower than I remembered. Diane never looked back. The Heritage Home Tour arrived the following Sunday. 43 strangers stepped through the front door I'd restored. They saw the heart-pined floors I'd hand-scraped, the rebuilt porch, the transom that turned sunrise into colored light across the entry. I told them what I believe. Nothing is too broken to restore if you're willing to do the work. They clapped. Genuine applause. 43 people who had no obligation to care, choosing to. Afterward, Dennis found me in the parlor, shook my hand firmly. I heard what really happened. I'm sorry I doubted you. Linda Fessler, clipboard still in hand, touched my arm. Your father told me a very different story, Ren. I owe you an apology. I didn't need the words, but I won't pretend they didn't land. Let me step outside the story again. I want to be honest. Standing in that house during the tour, hearing real applause, part of me wanted to cry, not from joy, but because I kept thinking, my dad drove past this house for 3 years and never once stepped inside, yet 43 strangers walked through and understood what it meant. I'm still unpacking what that reveals about my family. Here's my question for you. Do you think Gerald ever actually looked at the house? Really looked? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now, back to what followed. Monday morning, Janet's office. She laid it out plainly. The emergency freeze holds. The deed remains in your name. The title company has flagged Gerald's transaction as void. Ray Colton has retained counsel and filed a civil suit against your father for the $20,000 deposit plus legal fees. I nodded. And on the criminal side, Ren, I'll be direct. Janet folded her hands. Using a revoked power of attorney for a real estate transaction is fraud under Virginia law, a Class 4 felony, up to 10 years. The forged USPS change of address form is a federal offense. Postal Inspection Service doesn't treat that lightly. I sat with the weight of those words. My father, the retired postmaster, who wore a tie every day for 30 years, who alphabetized the spice rack, could face prison. What are my options? You can file criminal charges and let the system proceed, or you can decline prosecution and I'll draft a legally binding agreement. He never uses any document in your name again, has no direct contact with you except through counsel, and acknowledges the revocation in writing. I chose the second path. Janet studied me. You're being more generous than he deserves. I know, but he's still my father. I just can't let him be my father at my expense anymore. 3 weeks later, Ray Colton won his civil case. Gerald was ordered to repay the $20,000 from his retirement account. Diane called that night, voice breaking. Your father's retirement is gone, Ren. I let the silence hold for a moment. So was my house, Mom. The loan sharks proved easier to dismantle than expected. The county sheriff traced the rental sedan to 2 men running an unlicensed lending operation out of Richmond. Ed's photos, the license plate, the descriptions, matched an existing state investigation. Our report provided the final link. One was arrested at a motel in Westboro, the other vanished south. The deputy said they'd find him eventually. The $87,000 Marcus owed? Under Virginia law, loans from unlicensed predatory lenders are void and unenforceable. The debt didn't shrink or renegotiate, it erased as though it had never existed. Marcus was free, left holding only a lesson he hadn't sought. Gerald and Diane, stripped of their ability to rescue him with checks, finally did what they should have years ago. They gave him an ultimatum: Gamblers Anonymous and financial counseling, or he was on his own. No more bailouts, no more trucks, no more rent. Marcus agreed like someone agrees to surgery, not because he wanted to, but because the alternative was unbearable. I didn't call him, I didn't text, I owed him no conversation, but I asked Ed to slip one thing into Marcus's mailbox, a printed card listing the meeting schedule for a Gamblers Anonymous chapter in Staunton, the next county over, where no one would recognize his face. I didn't do it for Marcus. I did it because I know what it takes to rebuild something shattered. The first step is always finding the right tool. Recovery isn't mine to hand him, but a phone number? That I could provide. Small towns have a saying, good news walks, bad news rides. In Millhaven, Gerald's story arrived on horseback. I never spoke a word. I didn't need to. Linda told the Heritage Tour Committee. Dennis shared it with his regulars at the hardware store. Ray told his attorney, who told clients, who told neighbors across 3 counties. The truth seeped through Millhaven like water through old plaster. Slow at first, then everywhere. Gerald Archer, retired postmaster, community pillar, the man who donated the VFW's Christmas wreath every year, had forged his daughter's mail redirect, used a revoked power of attorney to sell her house, and tried to pocket $195,000 from a deceived buyer, all to cover his son's gambling debt. Pastor Reynolds invited Gerald for a private talk at the church. Gerald didn't show. He stopped attending Sunday services. Diane went alone and sat in the back pew. The VFW held their end-of-year dinner in November. Gerald's name wasn't on the guest list. No one asked why. At the hardware store, Dennis said Gerald came in once for weather stripping, the first time he never met anyone's eyes. The Millhaven grocery has 5 aisles, not much room to avoid people you've known for 40 years, so Diane started driving 15 miles to the Kroger in the next town. That's what shame looks like in a small town. Extra gas and a longer drive. Gerald never apologized to me. Not once. Not in a letter, not through Diane, not through Marcus. I stopped waiting for it around Thanksgiving. After that, he never mentioned my name to anyone in Millhaven again. Sometimes, silence is the only apology certain men know how to offer. The week before Thanksgiving, Diane called. Your father wants you to come for dinner. I was in the parlor, replacing a length of crown molding the movers had chipped. The house carried the clean scent of sawdust and linseed oil. Outside, Ed moved slowly across his yard, raking leaves the way 71-year-old knees demand. No, Mom. Ren, please, it's Thanksgiving. He's your... I love you, but I can't sit at a table with someone who sold my home behind my back and branded me selfish for wanting it returned. Not yet. He's trying. Is he? Has he said the words, "I'm sorry"? Has he once owned what he did? Silence answered for her. Mom, I'm not slamming the door. I'm putting a lock on it. When Dad is ready for an honest conversation, not through you, not through Marcus, not through lawyers, he can write me a letter. A real one, in his own handwriting. Then we can begin. A letter, Diane echoed, as though the word belonged to another language. Perhaps it did. Gerald had spent 30 years sorting other people's mail. Writing his own was uncharted territory. That's my condition. You're being stubborn. I'm being clear. There's a difference. I ended the call, set the phone on the windowsill. The stained glass transom cast jeweled light across my hands, amber, cobalt, emerald, like a quiet check-in. I lifted my chisel and returned to the molding. Some hear boundaries and picture walls, punishment, coldness. But boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. Doors with locks I control. A locked door isn't sealed forever. It simply means you have to knock. No one ever taught Gerald Archer how to knock. Maybe one day he'll learn. December arrived. The Heritage Home Tour delivered 3 new restoration contracts: a farmhouse in Augusta County with original stone foundations, a 1910 foursquare in Wensboro bearing water damage yet extraordinary bones, and a small brick cottage in Staunton that a young couple had bought for pennies because everyone else saw only ruin. I saw possibility. I always do. Ed remains next door. Every Saturday morning he knocks, truly knocks, and brings 2 coffees from the gas station on Route 11. We sit on my porch and talk about small things: pipe fittings, coming weather, the hawk that circles the church steeple. I hired a helper, Becca Trent, 22, fresh from the trade program at Blue Ridge Community College. She arrived her first day in steel-toed boots, ponytail swinging, and asked straight away where the demo hammer was. I liked her at once. I teach her the way old Tom Phelan once taught me. Start with the bones, I told her as we stood in the Staunton cottage, gazing up at the ceiling joists. Check the structure first. If the bones are sound, everything else can be repaired. Becca ran her palm along a joist, wrapped it, solid. And if the bones are rotten? I met her eyes and offered a real smile. Then you replace them, no matter how long they've stood. She nodded, as though the lesson had already taken root. Perhaps it had. That evening I stood on my porch, coffee warming my hands, sun sinking behind the Blue Ridge. Above me the transom glowed, amber, cobalt, emerald, spilling light no one could sell, steal, or sign away. I restore houses. That's my work. But this year I learned to restore something deeper, my own foundation. That's my story. It wasn't easy to share, but if even one person watching recognizes they have the right to protect what they've built, every word was worth it. If this touched you, please like and subscribe. It means more than you know. And if you've ever had to draw a boundary with someone you love, someone who made you feel selfish for holding your ground, share your experience in the comments. I read every one. There's another story linked in the description I think you'll connect with. Go take a look. Thank you for staying with me. Take good care of yourselves.